we are going to have a recorded reading from Jenny Frame. So off to you, Sandy.
I'm not Jenny Frame, but
no.
I'm going to share my screen so you guys can hear her amazing reading. 1 second.
Hi, my name is Jenny Frame, and I come from a little town called Motherwell, just outside Glasgow in Scotland, and it's lovely to be with you all today. So today I'm going to be reading from the first in my Dreamer Village series called The Duchess and the Dreamer. And actually the sequel to this book will be out on July 1st of this year, and it's called Home is Where the Heart Is. So I hope you'll enjoy it. Chapter 1. The harsh noise of an alarm blared its way into Clementine Fitzroy's subconscious, making her jump out of sleep. She grabbed the phone beside her and blindly stabbed her finger at the screen to stop the wretched air raid siren noise. Her vision and mind were still blurry from sleep. She managed to stop the noise, but her heart pounded at the fright it had given her. Clementine scrubbed her face with her hands and felt a twinge of pain in her neck. The neck pain meant she'd fallen asleep at her desk again. Now that her mind was clearing from sleep, everything came back into sharp focus. She had been up all night trying to meet a deadline and set the alarm in case she fell asleep, which she did. She moved her mouse to wake up her screen to check how far she had gotten before falling asleep and sighed. It's not even half done. Being a freelance architect meant she had the flexibility to be there for her ill mother, but also meant she'd lost a lot of work time doing so. Her mother was severely affected by Alzheimer's and had until 3 months ago been cared for by Clementine, here at home, the gatehouse to Rosebrook Estate. Clementine looked around the drab front room. It was dated, neglected, much like her life. Her desk sat in the space under the stairs, directly across from the living room fireplace and the armchair where her mother used to sit while she worked. Guilt crept up on her, although it was never far away. Her mother hadn't had an easy life, and Clementine had promised her that she would always take care of her. She meant that promise with every fibre of her being. But with worsening dementia affecting her mother's mind, she was persuaded by the doctors and her friend that a nursing home was the only place her mum would be safe. The memory of the last time her mother had gotten out of the house played in her mind. She'd come downstairs and found her mother's armchair empty. She'd gotten out of the house before, but now that the new locks were in place, she didn't think her mother could get out. It had been Clementine's own fault. She had been careless, and after bringing some shopping in from the car, she'd forgotten to take the key out of the front door, and her mother had disappeared. It had taken her and the other villagers who turned out an hour to find her, and that had been the final straw. The move was for her mother's safety, but she'd broken her promise. The ping of an email brought Clementine back to the present. She opened it and sighed. It was the project manager for the job she was working on, asking if they could expect her work in the next few hours. It wasn't possible. She'd need another day at least. Clementine leaned on the desk and covered her face with her hands, feeling tears come to her eyes. She was lucky to be given work by 2 companies run by university friends of hers who understood her situation. But she couldn't stretch that goodwill too far. And she had lost so much time this week as her deadline loomed. Despite being relieved of the 24/7 care of her mother, she visited every day and was always on call when her mother was distressed. And it had been a particularly bad week. Nothing calmed her mother but her own presence, and she received phone calls from the nursing staff to come almost every day. Okay, you can do this. Coffee and get this finished, Clementine said. She got up and hurried to the small kitchen to switch on the kettle. At the moment she did, the house phone rang, and Clementine's stomach twisted with tension. She picked up the phone and held her breath. Hello? Your Grace, sorry to interrupt your morning. Her heart sank when she heard the voice of Sister Fellows, the senior nurse in charge of her mother's care. She hated when she was reminded of her title, but she couldn't convince the care staff to drop it. Is my mother all right? Clementine said. I'm afraid the Dowager Duchess has tried to get out of the building again and injured her ankle. Clementine pinched the bridge of her nose and her whole body tensed. How did that happen? One of the newer members of staff opened the window in her room to let some fresh air in. Her Grace sprained her ankle badly climbing out. I'm terribly sorry, ma'am, but she won't settle and keeps asking for you. I'll be there as soon as I can. Clementine hung up the phone and felt panic fill her. She would need to ask for another extension. She was never going to finish her design project today. Clementine went back to her computer and quickly sent off the email. She wouldn't be surprised if the company took the job from her, and she couldn't blame them. She grabbed her handbag and car keys and quickly made her way out to the car. Panic turned to despair when she saw a flat front tyre. Clementine's anger spilled over and she kicked the old car. Bloody hell! Of course I've got a flat tyre, just perfect, just bloody perfect. She held her head in her hands. She didn't have time for this, so she might as well get on with it. She couldn't afford breakdown cover, and her car didn't have a spare wheel. So she took her puncture repair kit and pumped from the boot. It would at least get her to the care home. She had to get to her mother, no matter what. Clementine put the puncture kit down by the flat tyre and then looked up at the black wrought iron gates that marked the entrance to the grand but severely neglected Rosebrook House. On the gates, a battered and weathered for sale sign clung to the railings. The feelings of anger, sadness, and failure hung around the building like a dark cloud. Clementine looked down at her hands, stained with dirt and oil, and gave a hollow laugh. Look at me, Duchess of Rosebrook, Countess of Thistleburn, Baroness Portford, kneeling in the dirt, trying to mend the tyre on an ancient car. Who would believe it? I hope that you enjoyed that short reading of The Duchess and the Dreamer. Again, it was lovely to be with you today. The second book in this series will be out on July the 1st, and it's called Home is Where the Heart Is. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Cheerio.
Awesome, thank you. It was so cute to see Jenny act annoyed about something because she's such a sweetheart. All right, I'm gonna disappear. Have fun, you guys.
Brey, you're still muted.
You're on mute.
You know, you would think you'd be used to this after a year and a half of it, wouldn't you? Lynn, let's go with you next.
Okay.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're reading from and then dive in.
So this is my book that came out in March. This is Not Broken, my first with Boldstroke Books. And the bit that I'm reading is quite well into the story. The main character, Rose, is a very, very caustic, sort of harsh person, and she's trying to not admit that she's madly in love with Matt, who is the trans guy that she knows through the band that she's been following around. Unfortunately, she also happens to now be pregnant with the lead singer's baby, and so that's a whole added aspect to it that makes her even less likely to want to admit that she's in love and admit that she's soft and admit that she cares about somebody enough to make an effort. So this is the morning after. Rose woke up with the sun blazing in her eyes. It took her a moment of blinking before her memory came back online. Her first instinct was the smile crawling across her face, but she squashed it hard and sat up. Max's room was just big enough for the single bed. It had been a while since she'd shared one of those. Shelves were packed full of CDs and vinyl albums, a stereo in one corner and a guitar leaning against the wall. No Max, though. She rubbed her eyes and crossed her legs under the blankets. The door opened and Max pushed his way in, a tray of tea things clinking in his hands. He looked up and grinned. I'm not bringing you tea and breakfast in bed. I just don't know how you take your tea. Sensible as always, he snorted. Sensible? Don't insult me. The smile cracked her cool mask, and she chuckled as she took the mug from him and added milk and sugar. Max lowered the tray to the carpet and sipped his own tea with a sigh. Rose brushed fingers across the collar of his shirt. Dressed already? He smirked up at her. Did we ever actually get undressed? She looked down at her own t-shirt from the night before to hide the flush, as memories of falling back against the sheets rose up, pulling at his shirt and hands getting pushed away. Not for lack of trying, she said, because a tease was always preferable to honesty. She plucked at that undershirt he was wearing again. You have too many layers. He gave a half smile and looked away. Guess so. He took a sip of tea and looked up. The shirt stays on, he said in a rush. I don't like not wearing it. Rose shrugged. Okay. Max nodded to himself and sat back once more, running his fingers across his records. Music? Yeah, you have a lot. Why vinyls? They take up so much space. He shrugged. I like the sound beneath the music. They always crackle a little. It's like, I don't know, a fire in the background. Feels warmer, and I guess I like the commitment to them. You have to look after them and be close while they're playing. Otherwise, they keep spinning when the song ends. So you like to work for your enjoyment? She laughed. He gave her a filthy grin. You tell me. She tried to cover a blush by groaning and rolling her eyes. No way was she going to tell him he was right. Go on, Casanova, put a record on. What kind of music do you like? She tilted her head to one side. Tracy Chapman, Nora Jones, Nina Simone. Blues, I guess. Blues, huh? He smiled. I've got some of those guys, but he ran his fingers along the shelf and with a little pulled out a battered record. My grandfather gave me some of his records too. He held up the sleeve, which showed a man and a woman sitting on folded metal chairs, smiling at the camera. Ella and Lewis, we can pretend we're slicking back our hair with Brill cream and having burgers and shakes at the diner. He carefully slipped the disc out, dropped it onto the turntable and gently, almost reverently, lowered the needle into the first groove. A light piano started up a perky jazz tune and Ella Fitzgerald sang. Rose raised an eyebrow and reached for the album cover. They look a bit like my parents, you know, apart from the whole skin colour thing. She grinned. And my dad was bigger than Louis Armstrong in this picture. He must have been quite young here. I guess most of the pictures of him were from later. Max shrugged. The album was from the 50s, so I don't think he was that young. He closed his eyes as the song changed, a peaceful fireside sound. I love this one. God, feels like I could fall asleep right here. He leaned back against the bed, his head flopping back so that his hair spilled over her knee, and shut his eyes. Rose let herself smile and brushed through the strands gently while Ella and Louis sang Can't We Be Friends? I've got to work later today, Max said, opening his eyes to blink up at her. She gestured with her mug. Fine, I'll just finish this and I'll be out of your hair. He sat up, eyes widening. Oh, no, I didn't mean... Hey, Max, it's okay. I mean, we're not dating. He looked at her, his mouth slightly open. His face seemed stalled as if he was deciding what expression to make. She took pity on him and nudged his shoulder with her toe. Come on, you know me. I'm not going to be one of those one-night stands who won't take a hint. She forced a laugh and drained her tea, pulling her pants and jeans on under the blanket. You don't have to be. He said it so quietly that she had to check to see if he'd even really spoken. What? He blinked rapidly and sat straight. I mean, this worked well, just this, you know. It doesn't have to be a one-night stand. He laughed and rubbed his face. Sorry. What are words? I mean, if you want to do this again. She smiled slowly. You going to be my pregnant lady booty call? Something under her ribs squirmed, excited and confused. He mock glared at her. We'll be each other's booty call. Friends with benefits? He considered, then nodded sharply. All right, then. If she'd been paler, he'd have seen her blush. She pulled her bra and t-shirt on, smoothing it over her rounding belly. Long as you don't mind this getting more and more in the way. He laughed and shoved her hip lightly. Blood buzzing under her skin, she dropped a kiss on her cheek. Come on, farmer boy, give us a lift home. His smile crinkled up the skin under his eyes, and he drained his cup and jumped to his feet. Sure, let me just... He flicked the record off and lifted it gently off the turntable and into its sleeve. I'm gonna... Rose gestured behind her. Bathroom? Oh, down the corridor on your left. She nodded and actually gave him a thumbs up before turning to find the loo. Really, a thumbs up? She lowered her butt onto the loo and grubbed into her hands. Was this a really bad idea? Max was one of the only people she could stand to be around these days, and they were stumbling over their words and giving each other awkward thumbs up. She rubbed her temples. She really, really liked him. That was the trouble. It mattered if things went wrong. It wasn't like when she'd gotten together with Harley. She'd never cared what he thought of her, but Max, well, at some point, her being selfish and antisocial and bitchy was going to stop being funny and not enough. Or she was going to be too much, too caustic, too fat, pregnant. She was going to need no. She stamped on the Freudian slip in her own mind. She was going to want too much from him, and he was going to step back. The little voice in the back of her head that had always been too vulnerable gently said that that would hurt the most. Being rejected, not being the one to take the step back. Rose gritted her teeth. She'd have to make sure it never got that far. She didn't need anyone, and she never would. She fixed her makeup, made a face at the lack of deodorant, then nodded firmly to herself and opened the door. Max was standing at the bottom of the stairs, playing with his phone. He looked up when she started walking down, and for a moment before the cocky grin broke out over his face, there was a moment of softness or sadness in his eyes that almost made her miss a step. Hey, watch it, he laughed, grabbing her elbow. You don't have to fall into my arms. Shut up, she said, smacking his arm. My socks slipped on the wood. Awkward thumbs up time.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Lynn, just to clarify, that was a trans guy, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Max
Awesome.
trans.
Okay. I thought so, but I wanted to make sure. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm gonna, because a question has been posed directly to you, I'm gonna go ahead and ask you now.
Okay. Sure.
How does your real life affect your stories, especially this one? Thank you for asking, Aloise.
Thank you. I think it's little fragments of life are sort of most likely to make their way into my story. So it's not like this whole event isn't from my own personal life, but weirdly enough, it all got tangled up a bit with my life actually, because in the middle of writing a story about a trans man, my eldest child came out as trans in the middle of me writing it. So, and it was very close. I actually considered stopping writing because I was like, I don't want to, I don't want to make this about myself or anything. But they were really excited about, they now identify as non-binary. So that was like 3 or 4 years ago that they came out, and they now identify as non-binary, but they actually wanted to see something of themselves in books. So I want to write books that they will see themselves in. And but other than that, it's little fragments of real life end up in my books, like the farming and the Ella Fitzgerald albums, and just little bits, but I don't tend to take people and put them in. So.
Awesome. Brilliant. Thank you very much. And Michelle, why don't we head over to you now? Because I know you're raring to go.
Excellent, thanks. You can all turn off the videos now, thank you. So my reading is from my latest, or my work in progress, if I'm being perfectly honest. And I'm reading from the very first chapter. The book is called Identity, and my main character is a person who identifies as a lesbian. And my other character is a transgender male. So I'm starting at the beginning, mostly because that's the only bit, because I only really finished it on Friday. That's the only bit that I've managed to look at more than once. So chapter 1. It's coming! Asha Voss pulled the phone from her ear. Rath's screech was akin to nails on a blackboard. She felt old. She knew that sound from experience, not YouTube. Breathe, Rath. You'll need all the oxygen you can get soon. She didn't add, because your wife's soon going to be in the most unimaginable pain and she'll be looking squarely at you to lob 100% of the blame. To her dismay, she heard him sucking air. She needed him to focus. How's Greta? Is she comfortable? Yeah, I guess. There was a groan in the background, more a growl really. The usual decisive, confident and unflappable Raph was losing his grip. It's early, Ash. It's 4 fucking weeks early. Asha heard Greta shout something about it being a girl and not an it. Loads of babies come early, Raph. They have their own schedule, you know. She glanced at her alarm clock, 5:56 a.m. It's a bad day for this, Ash. Assembly and pick-up are tonight. I've told you how big this is, right? Siphon is happening and I can't be in 2 places at once. Shit. Asha finally caught up. Siphon, what little she knew about it, was the result of modern policing at its best. Intelligence gathering, analysis and thousands of person hours piecing it all together. If today was the day it would come to a head, a culmination of nearly 2 years of hard graft, she understood why Raph might be losing his shit. He had an officer on the inside, only Raph, the undercover handler, and the senior members of his team would know who. But whenever this thing finally went down, it would be the undercover's show. Their arse was well and truly swinging in the breeze. After 6 months out of the loop, she had no idea this day was even looming, let alone imminent. Raph had barely taken a breath. Lucy's good, she's real good, but I refuse to let her be the scapegoat if something goes wrong. Lucy was Raph's right hand, his best officer. It's not the 70s, Raph. We don't just pick up our own when we don't get the result we wanted. That was still the 80s and 90s, Asher, plus our lot of trust. Those tots in Westminster who trade their firstborn for shit not to land anywhere other than someone else's back door. She knew what he meant. The national crime agencies were, on balance, doing a better job of stemming corruption than some other agencies, but it wasn't infallible. The NCA were thorough, very thorough, and Raph should have planned for this scenario. He preempted her next question. I had this covered, Ash. There's a date crossed off in my calendar, 33 days from now when this baby was due to arrive via a fucking C-section. I can't have this coming back on any of us. Lucy's got this. She's all over it, maybe more than me. But I can't leave her without an AD for backup. Can you please be there for support? I know it's your first day back, and I'm sorry to ask, but this is big. She'll brief you when you get in. It wasn't Ash's first day back. Tomorrow was her first day back, and this wasn't her intended itinerary for her last day of leave. You should have briefed Nadia, Raph. Nadia was one of the ADs up to her neck in human trafficking cases. Somehow dealing with arseholes trafficking guns was more palatable than creeps trafficking human sex slaves. I know, but I had a 33-day window, damn, and I thought it'd be more than enough. Raph would cop a right bollocking as it was, an administrative oversight like this, and someone's ass was going to get kicked. Months of work and thousands of taxpayer pounds down the shitter if it went wrong because you forgot to plan a contingency for your wife having a baby early. And even if it didn't go wrong for that reason, the result would be the same. You know, I've been swanning around the country in the lap of Premier Ing luxury for 6 months, Raph, right? I feel about as ready for this as you seemingly are for fatherhood. Please, Asher. Anyway, Task Force Consultancy is for wimps. This will kickstart you back into the real world. Nice try, Arthur. So much for her relaxing day after an organised crime consultancy secondment, playing with the bigwigs. So much for swanning in, looking her actual age, refreshed and alert without the telltale dark circles under her eyes and a default look of frustration. So much for a morning catching up with her team, patting Ivan on the back for his great work at the helm and briefing them on a new operation she'd been directed to run. Ash, are you still there? Back to reality. I've got your back, Raph. No problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Very good. Right. So I'm not sure if this question is directed directly to you, Michelle, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What is it about the story or characters in this book that motivated you to write it? What inspired you? And kind of when did you know that this was the book you were going to write?
So I think there's an underrepresentation of transgender people in books in general, but we have friends who are having a similar scenario in their life as what I've written in the book. So, and I suppose it's what I don't know, but you always tend to have the after a few drinks, you have that conversation. Well, I have it with my wife, and it's that, what would you do if I wanted to become a man, or what would you do if I didn't want to be a female anymore? So it's those types of things, and I think it's not, I wouldn't like to say it's an issue, but it's something that we all tend to discuss privately, but never really openly. And I think there's nothing wrong with having those discussions. So I think for my characters, it's about their identity, more so the identity of the character who identifies as a lesbian. But you'll have to read it to see what actually happens.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you very much. Right. Charlie, why don't we head over to you next?
Cool. Let me just change my glasses from the looking at the screen ones to looking at paper ones. This reading is from a book called, a novella called Awfully Glad, which is set in World War One. And we'll just head straight into it. So, a makeshift stage, an entirely male audience in khaki, the Macaroni's concert party with their star attraction, the lovely Madeline. The knock on the dressing room door, what passed for a dressing room door, was answered with a velvety "come in." Captain Corrie popped his head round the door and said, "There's quite a gang of us. That's fine, so long as you don't mind it being cramped." The little knot of officers, some of them still making a vain attempt to look presentable, squeezed in through the doorway to find Madeline at her dressing table, still in the red costume she'd worn for the final number, although her shoes had been discarded to reveal a pair of long, neatly stockinged dancer's feet and another flash of those ankles. "Welcome, gentlemen. So nice to see you again, Captain." She offered Corrie her hand. He bent over it, lips hovering just above the knuckles. "And you too, my dear. I hope your sister's well." "She is, thank you, doing some nursing work. We all have to play our part." "Indeed," Corrie grinned. "And how's Elizabeth?" Madeline asked, gently wafting herself with an improvised fan. Apparently it wasn't just the young officers who were getting overheated. "She's keeping well, being brave for the sake of the boys." Corrie's smile softened as he spoke of his wife and family. "Now, may I introduce some of our men? Madeline, this is Lieutenant Brown." "Delighted." Brown delicately shook the hand presented to him, then slipped back as the other two jostled for position, Hampson being bold enough to kiss the red-gloved fingers. "You sang so beautifully, like an angel," Cole said when it was his turn, blushing from neck to hairline. "Thank you, although I mustn't take the credit. It's an excellent company." Madeline turned her deep blue gaze on Cole. "What did you think of the tenor? Such a fine voice. He was in the West End, of course, before he signed up." Yes, very good," Cole stammered, looking like a nervous schoolboy. The flower of King George's army rendered helpless by a pair of sparkling eyes and a dress which had slipped to show just a touch too much shoulder. Maybe it had been deliberately arranged that way. "I saw him in the Mikado when Noah was a boy," Corrie laughed. "Are they allowing him to sign up at his age? That was his father as well, you know, you naughty boy." Madeline slapped the colonel on his arm with her fan. "I shall have to report back to Elizabeth." "Heavens!" Corrie raised his hands in mock surrender. "No mentions in one of your dispatches, please. She'll have my guts for garters." Madeline smiled, then inclined her head regally. "Now, tell me about yourselves, lads. Have you got sweethearts at home?" She winked at Corrie again, the pair of them evidently enjoying the discomfort of the younger men. "Or would it be wrong to mention them? I understand a lady's name should never be mentioned in the mess. We should adhere to that rule." The conversation turned to a gentle probing of where the officers came from. Gradually they lost their unease, opening up their hearts to pour into Madeline's willing ear, to the extent that they became bold, bolder than was perhaps wise in the circumstances. "Sorry if we're being forward, but we wondered if you would join us for a drink afterwards. There's a little estaminet." Hampson's words petered out under Madeline's piercing blue gaze. "But of course, once I've changed out of my working clothes." "Oh yes, come on chaps, let's leave the lady to it." Whether Hampson was in a hurry to leave the room to spare Madeline's modesty or hide his own blush, who could tell? The blush deepened to an ugly red at her reply. "Oh, no need for that." She favoured Corrie with a wink. "Stay and keep me company." Oh! Hampson's eyebrows shot up as Madeline unpinned her wig and removed it, to reveal short cropped hair, a couple of shades darker than his, dark auburn with sweat. She smiled, but not her usual coquettish smile. This one was masculine. The lines of the mouth suddenly hardened. The illusion had been broken. "Lieutenant Samuel Hines, gentlemen, female impersonator extraordinaire, and a very old friend of the family," Corrie added, maybe in case his officers thought he spent all his off-duty hours hanging around with men wearing lipstick. "Not so much of the old," Sam replied in a voice which had gone down an octave since he'd last spoken. He began to wipe the makeup off his face. "Sorry to shatter any illusions," he said, addressing Cole, who was clearly trying to give the impression he'd known all along. Better you know now before we get to the estaminet. A bit of footsie under the table might have ended up with you getting your shins raked. And done.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you very much, Charlie. And Charlie, we've got a question aimed at you, I believe.
Okay.
Did you decide to set your story in World War I and create the storyline and characters? Or did you come up with characters and then decide it had to be in World War I?
A bit of both, really. I'd read a book about including a bit about the concert parties that they would have during World War I, and there used to be a lot of female impersonators. Famous one called Isabel the Hot Stuff, who I've not been able to track down. Madeline's based on another one, but apparently these people were so popular that they would be captured by other regiments and, you know, taken off to perform for their own troops. And once I'd read that, which was, I think was in a book about just army songs of First World War, I thought, I've got to write the story. And it almost wrote itself, because once you've got a female impersonator, and clearly one of those three men sees through it straight away and the title is Awfully Glad. So sends a note to say, I'm awfully glad actually that you're not a woman. So I think the setting and the characters just came together, because I suspect there were several real life instances that were not dissimilar to that going on.
Fantastic. That's fabulous. I love it. Isabel Hot Stuff. That's fantastic.
Yes, yeah.
Cool.
I've got to find out more about him, but I can't. It's just, yeah.
That's wonderful. Fantastic. Thank you. Right. So just a reminder to everybody watching, if you want to pop your questions in the Q&A, we'll have a little bit more time at the end to ask more questions. But now we turn it over to Anna Larner. Anna.
Hi. Hello, everybody. As we said, my name is Anna Larner. I'm a lesbian romance novelist, and I always say that because that's the best thing to do ever in the world. Before I read from my latest work, which is a sequel to Highland Fling, called Highland Whirl, I'll just give you a brief little look at the cover. Can you see that there? I'm going to steal a cheeky minute from my reading time, just to tell you a little bit about my writing for those that haven't perhaps met me before. I hope that's okay. To date, I've written 3 lesbian romances. My debut novel, Highland Fling, was a finalist in the 2018 Golden Crown Literary Society Awards. It's set in the majestic Highlands of Scotland and tells the story of the sweet city librarian Eve Edison, who falls in love with a holiday fling, the enigmatic Highlander and older woman Moira Burns. My second novel, Love's Portrait, was a finalist in the 2019 Rainbow Awards and the 2019 Forward Indies Book of the Year Awards. It tells the story of the passionate museum curator Molly Good and the aloof investment banker Georgina Wright, as they fall in love when they discover together the moving story behind the painting of a beautiful woman from the 1830s. But today, I'm excited to share with you my latest work, Highland Whirl, where I take you back to the Scottish Highlands and the characters of Highland Fling, except this time I bring out the story of the minor characters, the city girl about town, Roxanne Barnes, and the feisty Highlander, Alice Campbell. Let's just say 4 years on from the ending of Highland Fling, either Roxanne and Alice are looking forward to seeing each other again when they're reunited for Eve's 30th birthday party. And they certainly don't expect to fall in love. So here we are, so this is Highland Whirl. In this excerpt, Roxanne's ex, Belinda, is intrigued to hear about Roxanne's upcoming trip to the Highlands and wants to know why Roxanne is simply dreading it. Okay. Looking forward to Evie, really am. Bye for now. Roxanne shoved her phone deep into her jacket pocket. What are you looking forward to? Belinda asked with a tone infused with, can I come? No word, nothing. I'm just visiting Eve in Scotland for a holiday. For a holiday and for her birthday. Really? The Highlands are meant to be beautiful. I've never been. Nope, me neither. When'd you go? Roxanne ignored the slightly deflated note to Belinda's voice. Roxanne shrugged. Fortnight or so? You didn't seem particularly excited. Honestly, I'm dreading it. How come? Eve's happy living with Moira, yes. Happiest I've ever known her, go figure. Oh, there you are then, you've nothing to worry about. Yeah, you say that. You've met Alice, right? Moira's stepdaughter. Belinda momentarily stopped to frown and shake her head. Alice. Yes, Alice Campbell. She came with me to the Brewers that crazy night not long after Eve's Highland fling with Moira. You remember when Moira turned up here all the way from the Highlands at some talk at the library she contrived, without actually telling Eve she was coming, just to confess that she wasn't exactly single. Belinda pulled down her bottom lip and frowned even more. Come on, you do remember. Tall blonde hair scraped back, arse clenching the uptight with the resting bitch face. She was having a total meltdown. Oh, nothing really. Just the revelation of her stepmum cheating on her dad by shagging Eve. Oh, God. Belinda put a hand over her mouth. I remember her now. She told you to go to hell when you tried to help her see the truth. Bingo. That's who I have to face again. Okay, fair enough. But can't deny she was hot. In a horrified, what the chuff am I doing here kind of way. Poor thing, it looked for all the world that she'd honestly thought she'd stepped into a den of debauchement. Yeah, she kind of had. They both laughed. Honestly, Belle, being in Alice's company that night was like being constantly stung by an angry wasp. Belinda retucked her arm in Roxanne's as they started the final few yards to the Indian restaurant. I'm sure she's mellowed, Rox. Roxanne gave a grumpy, maybe. He's been singing her praises. Oh, there you go. She's been helping to teach Eve to drive, apparently. She even described her as cool. Belinda nudged Roxanne's shoulder. Cool. Sounds to me like you're over worrying. Just go, have fun, and come back. My dinner's on you tonight, you know that, don't you? Belinda led the way into the restaurant. Roxanne stared after her, her gaze falling on the dining room beyond, on the glint of metal domed dishes catching the light, as the melody of the sitar muddled itself with the hum of dinner conversations. Was Belinda right? Was she over worrying? Or was she right? And she had every reason to dread her first visit to the Highlands and everything and everyone that went with it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Anna. That was lovely. Beautiful as always. And if you haven't read Anna's yet, you should really just immerse yourself in it, because her writing is just, it's like a painting. It's really, really beautiful. So I guess that leads to me. Let me check the Q&A real quick. Question for you, Anna. Joni, you've been amazing on questions. Thank you very much. You're almost a plant. It's perfect. Anna, what is it about the Highlands that keeps drawing you back? Do the interesting characters draw you back to tell more stories, or do the plot lines come and the only place they could possibly be is in the Highlands?
Oh, that's a very good question. Highland Whirl is a sequel to Highland Fling. So Highland Fling has brought me back. So it's in many ways, Highland Whirl feels like a sort of a very sort of beautiful, satisfying conclusion to Highland Fling, and at the same time, embedded within Highland Fling was the story of Highland Whirl. So it felt like a very natural process to return to the Highlands and to those characters. Roxanne Barnes, we get a feeling that there's a bit of history as to why she's so close to Eve and dependent on her, really. And certainly Alice Campbell was just so, she was a very angry young woman in Highland Fling. And I knew as her author, there was a lot more to her. And I wanted to tell her story. So really it's for those that read Highland Fling and enjoyed it, you know, hopefully you'll see that it feels like a real continuation of that story, but also completely fresh and a new way of seeing the narrative that we had in Highland Fling. So it was lots of fun to write as well. The characters of Roxanne and Alice are just great,
Awesome. Cool. Thank you very much.
Can I embarrass Anna a very tiny bit?
By all means.
I can remember the first time we met. I don't think Highland Fling was yet out, and it has been an absolute pleasure to see Anna develop in confidence and sort of blossom into, if I say a real writer, that sounds terrible because she's always been a real writer, but you know, it's like she's found herself, and it's lovely, really nice.
That's lovely. All right, so I guess that leaves me. So I'll go ahead and read now. My newest book is Song of Serenity. That it comes out in December of this year, and it follows on from the Afterlife Inc. trilogy, which is all about the gods who were being very lazy and kind of answering email, prayer by email, and doing the bare minimum. And they have come out into the world. They're part of the world now. So this is the very first book that follows the muse of justice and serenity. And each book in this series will follow one of the 9 muses. So there's going to be quite a few of them. And they take place 5 years after the afterlife world has begun. So this one, we come into the story where the 2 characters are kind of going head to head, and we see that Jordan, who has bought the land in this village in Scotland where Calliope goes to relax, Jordan wants to build an adventure park on it, where with treetop climbing and rappelling and roller coasters and all this kind of stuff. And Calliope is very angry about this because this is where the Temple of the Muses is, and it's one of only 2 temples to the Muses in the entire world. So with that, your adventure park didn't take the temple into account. You're planning on putting a parking lot right there. Calliope motioned to the base of the hill like she was pointing at a pile of dog poo. You're going to turn the area around this temple, where people ask for wonderful things, into a land of concrete and screaming children. That says more about you and your relationship to children than you might think. Jordan pinched the bridge of her nose. Why did the most beautiful woman she'd seen in years have to be one of them? And I did take this into account, by the way. You did? Calliope frowned. Then how could you go ahead? I saw that there was a hill here, and it had something built on it. But the wiki page said it was basically not much more than a sculpture. Still, the edge of my purchase goes to the base of the hill. It didn't include it. So you keep your temple and I keep my park. This wasn't going to be the end of it, no question. She could feel the arguments rating off Calliope without her having spoken, like the words were seeping from her skin, about to fly off like knives. No, that's not how this works. As I said, you can't change an area of natural beauty, as well as worship, into an adrenaline junkie's trampoline. I won't allow it. If there was anything Jordan despised, it was being told what she could and couldn't do, especially by someone who had no idea what it was like to be human. She straightened and worked to keep her tone civil. You don't have an option. I've bought the land. The permits are just waiting on signatures. My crews are on standby to begin the groundbreaking. I'm sorry it might interfere with how your pretty little temple looks, but if people want your help bad enough, I'm sure they'll still plod up here. Maybe it'll even get more footfall from people who want to hang out with both of us. The last time Jordan had seen a woman this visibly angry, she'd had to run from the house with literal pottery flying past her head. That was when she realized that she needed to have at least some idea of the language if she was going to bed a woman in another country. One-night stands weren't a given in some countries, apparently. If Calliope had any dishes to hand, Jordan would bet money she'd be running down the hill dodging bowls and mugs. She backed away. I think I should go. Calliope didn't say anything. Not with words, anyway. Her eyes were blazing, her hands were on her hips, and her jaw was clenched. You don't want to fight with me, Jordan. The muse of justice doesn't lose. If I'm right, a muse inspires other people to be awesome. They're not awesome themselves. You don't scare me, princess. Calliope took a step toward her, and she took a step back, misjudging the hill and promptly landing on her ass in the mud. Calliope stood looking down at her. You have no idea what I can and can't do, and your ignorance is showing. If you insist on taking this forward, I will fight you every step of the way. Looking up at her from where she sat with mud oozing into the back of her jeans, Jordan had to admit to being at least a little scared. Backlit by the sun, she looked like the immortal she was. Jordan struggled to her feet and wiped her muddy hands on her jeans. I love a good challenge. I'm ready when you are. Attempting to look dignified, she stomped down the hill and back to her car. Calliope didn't follow, for which Jordan was grateful. She squelched into her seat and closed her eyes as she rested her head on the steering wheel. Her hands were shaking and her stomach turned. Of all the fucking obstacles, this wasn't one she'd foreseen. It was true, fighting the immortal Set could damn well be a losing battle. She lifted her head and stared at the bit of the dome she could see over the trees. No matter what, she wouldn't back down. They'd taken enough from her, and now was her chance to take something back. So I'm going to leave that there and jump into any other questions. So thank you, Laura. Unfortunately, December is quite a ways away, but I have signed the next contract for the next book in the series, which is Vision of Virtue. So let's get to questions. We've got a couple in the box here. Brey, how did you get the idea to work with the muses? Well, the Afterlife series deals with gods of every religion. We've got kind of Ganesh, and we've got Shiva, and we've got gods with elephant trunks and gods with 8 arms. And the muses just seem like a good place to go, I suppose, because it's all about creativity, and that's what we are about as writers. And I mean, Anna, I believe you paint as well, if I'm not mistaken. And I know a lot of us like music. Sorry, Anna.
I was going to say, I do. Funny enough, when I was a little dude in my A levels, I did art, and I did sort of history art degrees. But you're right, it's creativity comes out in our writing, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think playing with the muses, and each one who has a different sector, so to speak, seems like a lot of fun. And 9 books, you know, what's daunting about that? So let's see what else we have here. Thank you for that, Betty. How do you know when you have too much info and not enough romance? How do you keep a balance? That's an interesting question. Michelle, let's start with you on that one.
Fabulous. I've got no idea how I know. I don't. I think it's so subjective, isn't it? Because whatever you're expecting in the book as a reader is what you think is going to be more or less, isn't it? So I think from an author's perspective, what we try and do is please everyone, fail at that dismally, and then just please ourselves. So I like to, it always makes me a bit uncomfortable talking about sex scenes, because I always comment that my mum writes them and then I just copy and paste them in, which I actually never read one of my books, in fairness. But I think because sex is such a huge part of the romance in this genre, well, for me, especially when I was first starting to read lesbian romance, it was a huge thing. So personally, I like just to throw a bit in of romance and sex and hope that it's enough for everyone. And if it's too much, I apologize. If it's not enough, crack on with your own self of whatever you want to do. But it's just one of those things, isn't it? You just need to make sure that you're trying to please everyone, mostly yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Anna, that's a good question for you too, I think, because obviously you have a ton of research and the Highlands and all of that stuff. So how do you balance the two?
I think I follow an arc, which is a relationship arc, and that helps me make sure that the relationship is at the fore of my thoughts, and also the way I structure the narrative. So I always start there, and I think if that's your focus for the journey throughout, chances are you'll have, your reader will be kept with you in the emotional journey of the characters. But one of the things which really interests me, and always in both Love's Portrait and Highland Fling, is making sure the setting and the story that underpins that romance is also very strong. You kind of owe it to the writer to have that depth and to have that level of interest, really. So I think the key is to concentrate on the romance and the people first, but also make sure that the narrative has, you can carry various strings of narrative along and bring them together, at the end. So crafting is very important, and that's a way of making sure the balance is okay.
Great, thank you. Charlie, how about you? Because you've obviously got a ton of stuff with your World War I information.
I think what you did, it's the old saying about whoops your research is showing. I think we can, as authors, learn a lot as readers. And if I'm reading a book and it is just full of info dump and there's a lot around, you just get bored. And I think you lock that away and think, I won't make that same mistake when I'm writing. So I think you put in the little, it's sort of seeding enough little seeds that you're giving the feel of an era without some 3-page interminable description of how trenches were set up, because that's great if you're reading a book about how trenches were set up, but frankly in a romance book you're not interested. So it's just about it's getting the balance right, but seeing it perhaps a bit like Michelle's saying, you're seeing it through a reader's eyes rather than just, I've spent all this time doing this research, I must get it on the page or it's wasted. Well, it's not, because it'll seep through by osmosis. I'm sure it will.
Yeah, great answer. Lynn, you're a new author, but do you have an answer for that one?
Well, I actually had this, most of my books are written about sort of the modern day with a little bit of a twist. Actually, this is one of the few books that I've ever written which doesn't have that little magical weirdness going on. So I escaped that quite a lot by avoiding historical research. Having said that, the book that my second book that's coming out in February next year involves, the main character is studying physics at Oxford University, and I have a vague understanding of physics, but I did have to do a lot of research just to understand what she was going to be studying, and so that I didn't sort of say, oh, she's going to be studying, she's sitting in the lecture doing, I don't know, electronics, when actually the lecture would be much more specific than that. So it, like Charlie said, it's the sort of bits that come through by osmosis. And one of the worst ones I found, I should probably never write history, because I was writing the story and I kept thinking, would they say this swear word in these days? And then right further along, and would they use a Zippo lighter in 1920 and stuff? So I had a lot of notes in the margins of my book the first time round. And I think it is just the little bits, don't dive in and sort of study optics and so on to just shove it in the book, because nobody, I'm sure people who study optics care, but nobody cares about, Talia and Kitty getting together about optics. So.
Cool. Awesome, thank you. So we don't have much more time. Let me just check and see if there's a quick question. I'm gonna give you a quick question to think about, and you can answer it right at the end. If you were an animal, what kind of animal would you be? So think about that for a second while I look at another question. Okay, this is a good one. Would you ever write a novel that isn't in the romance genre? And what is it that keeps you writing romance? So Anna, let's start with you on that one.
I was thinking about the animal I'd be. Can you repeat that?
What keeps you writing romance? And would you write a different genre?
Thank you.
So professional, Anna.
My imagination always strays to women falling in love. It's there in my heart. So when I imagine stories and conceive of writing a novel, I feel it will be a romance. And it's not that I'm not intrigued. I love the thought of crafting a crime or a thriller because of how it would be as a sort of an exercise in tension and building and so forth. So I can certainly see why my colleagues are tempted to write those sort of things. But for me, I'm lesbian romance girl in my heart, and I think that's where I'll stay.
Oh, that's lovely. Very nice. Charlie, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I do write, so I write mysteries as well. I have been tempted. There's a novel that I'm playing with that's sort of at first draft level that I'm sort of trying to work on and trying to find a home for because it's a bit peculiar. And it's about it's about superheroes, but they have the most completely useless powers. So, you know, somebody's power is they always have the right change in their pocket to pay for what they have to pay for. It is as weird as it sounds.
That sounds like my kind of book.
Yes, and that's why. So yes, and it's just fun because actually you can let all the restraints go and just write what you feel like writing without thinking, and I must now have this part of the story up. I have to have the tension, and we have to get to the end bit. But yeah,
cool, excellent. Lynn, how about you?
Well, I have sort of looked into various different genres and have to often get Sandy going, no, can you please focus? And like, you need to focus on something. But I'm bi, and I don't really care about my own gender or anything. So, but like Anna said, it's all about romance. I think it doesn't matter what I'm writing. It's almost everything ends up with something like, oh, and then they fell in love, because I'm really soft. That's just the only thing I haven't ever written a romance in was a story about young children. So it was before I was with Bold Strokes, and I wrote a story set in my hometown in Kenya, and the romance just wasn't happening because it was coming of age. But otherwise, I'm really soft, and I see romance all over the place. So yeah,
nice.
Like people falling in love.
Thank you. Now, Michelle, you and I are both kind of snarky, sarcastic people who don't like people. So what keeps you writing romance?
I don't know what gives you that impression. I think love makes the world go round. I think we're all a bit naive if we think that's not what, there's huge amounts of money in the world to all get us to find the person we love and that type of thing. So for me, writing romance, I like writing romance, and I like always bringing it back to that point of finding the right person. But I do like to weave other things in as well. So I think that's why I think I've written one character-driven romance, and I found it difficult, to be honest. I think I prefer to have the other stuff weaving through it. So yeah, and I like the people I create. They're okay. For the time that I create them, it's the other. I'm joking. I'm joking. Your turn. You tell us about yours.
Yeah, I mean, like you, I weave other stuff in. So I like the romance as part of a bigger story. I have trouble writing pure romance because I get very tired of people talking to each other. Like, I can't think of what else they could possibly have to say to each other that's worth hearing. So I need planets, and I need things exploding, and I need extra stuff coming in. Okay, so that takes us right to the end. What kind of animal would you be if you were an animal, Charlie?
One of these, it's called an Indricotherium, and it's bigger than an elephant. They don't exist anymore, which is very sad. But that's
paleontology.
Yeah.
Excellent, fantastic. Anna?
I think I'd be like a dog, but in a household that doesn't exercise too much.
Excellent. Michelle?
I'm in Anna's house.
You'd be a what?
I'm in Anna's house. Well, I'm the other dog that doesn't like to exercise too much. Actually, I don't mind exercising. I'll be the exercising dog. You can be the kick back and relax dog. Job done.
Excellent. Lynn?
I'm sorry, I'm really dark here, but I'd be like a snake or a bird, so something that can hide or something that can fly away.
Nice. Excellent. I would be a sloth. I would be a happy, smiling little sloth that would hang from a tree and never ever move. So
I'm sorry, I've just seen Joan's comment, a flying snake. I would be a flying snake. Thank you.
there you go, a flying snake. Right. Thank you so much, everybody. This was
Thank you.
lots and lots of fun. Thanks, everybody.